There is scientists tell us repeatedly every day the urgency of acting on it. On the other hand, there are other realities. There is a reality of affordability of food crisis. There is the reality of the farmers' protest that just happened and showed us how some of the European citizens are not happy to go along with some ambitious policies. Maybe with some others they would. We don't know, but there is sometimes when I open the media, I see that citizens don't want to do this whole green transition. And when I open my scientific sources, I see that we should go faster. And when I talk to my peers, we are a little bit puzzled by this. How can we do it in a democratic, efficient, but also true to the science and the faith we have? So here we seem to experience a clash of realities that is quite hard to resolve. I cannot. So I turn to my two colleagues and friends to help us think it. Maybe I would start with Philippe Lamberts. How would you answer the unanswerable question?
How to go about this, you mean?
Yes.
Well, first, let me start with the reasons of hope. I think that there's a very widespread understanding in all societies that status quo is not an option. So you may think that indeed the ambition of the green transition has now lost impetus in Europe. Yes, it's no longer the number one preoccupation of all citizens, but it's still ranking very high. We didn't lose this. Simply, there are other worries that exist and that you can just not ignore. It's a bit the saying in French that the end of the month is becoming more important than the end of the world. And yes, to some extent that's true, but we should already rejoice at the fact that the sentiment that we need to respect planetary boundaries is widespread in society, including in farming communities. It's not like these rural communities ignore the fact that we are confronted with planetary boundaries. Actually, they have a claim of understanding them better than urban kind of people like many of us are. So that's a first reason for keeping hope. A second reason is that we have resources. It's not like, Colin mentioned that the Common Agricultural Policy is 1/3 of the budget. Well, Europe is not a poor continent. I mean, facing the need for the green transformation, including of our agricultural and food system, at least in Europe, we have means to achieve it. It's not like we are totally dependent on external help to make it happen. We are a rich continent. We should not ignore that. Now, of course, there are obstacles. I might just want to point out that a sustainable food system is not just about farming. It's about transformation. It's about transport. It's about many things. But you're right to point that thinking and shaping the coming agricultural policy is crucial. That will be the crucial battle. Because if I can summarize my thinking about this is that when I spoke with angry farmers a year ago on the Place de Luxembourg, first, you could not ignore the amount of suffering of at least those farmers who were demonstrating, because no, not all farmers were demonstrating. I mean, the current agricultural system benefits some, right, more than others. And it was the others who were demonstrating. You cannot possibly impose the green transformation on our unsustainable agricultural model, ignoring the degree of suffering of those who are farming the land. And by that I mean, yes, they know that the transformation is needed, but they are totally prisoner of a system that A, doesn't provide them with a decent income, because their buying prices as well as their selling prices are imposed upon them, which means rather thin margins, if at all, which means that if you have no margins, you have to run for volume. That means growing, buying land, so paying for that, but then mechanizing, which means getting into debt. That means becoming dependent from A, the suppliers, B, the banks, So these people are totally prisoner of a system. And you know, when you are on the verge of drowning, if you see someone, instead of, well, throwing you a lifeline, telling you, well, you have to transform, well, little chance that you're going to be hurt. And that is where the common agricultural policy is crucial, because it must be the instrument, the financial instrument, to precisely throw a lifeline to the bulk of our family farms for them to survive, I would say, the death valley of the transition, in the sense that they are already financially near bankrupt. They aspire to this brave new world, but they need to financially survive and not being forced basically to hand over their land and their farm to bigger farms. So that battle is the key battle, at least on the agricultural side. And indeed, I would expect a movement such as this to push in that direction. Now, I rejoice at the fact that it's a Christian Democrat who is in charge of agriculture. It's a Christian Democrat who is in charge of the European Commission. There's many Christian Democrats around. And it's a fact that there's many Christian farmers. And I'm glad that one of your founding organizations is indeed directly linked to farming, but I think this should be widened, because indeed, in my exchanges with farmers, I often bumped into Christian farmers, and they know this, you know, and many of them read Laudato Si. That's not the issue, but indeed they are facing a very difficult equation to solve, and unless this is a collective effort, it won't succeed, and we need their voices around the table, and this is why the strategic dialogue that was started by President von der Leyen is, I think, a very fruitful initiative, but more needs to be done in order to build political consensus around the need for change. But I see a path there. I can elaborate on that later, but I see a path towards some audacious change in the CAP.
Thanks very much. Gael, how do you see this?
Yeah, maybe I would go back to two aspects of the big picture, just underlying what Philippe said. Regarding the ecological challenge, let's say, just to help us understand what's going on, I would say we have to keep in mind the fact that there is one issue, which is greenhouse gas emissions. And so it was reminded that agriculture worldwide represents approximately 1/4, 25%, 30%. Well, in the EU it's only, quote unquote, 13%, but it's still a lot. So that's one aspect. Second aspect, water. And growing scarcity of fresh water is becoming a problem worldwide. So we already know that by 2030, the demand gap, that is the gap between how much human beings will ask for fresh water and how much will be available, so the gap between demand and supply, should be something like 40% by 2030. So not in the EU, but worldwide. So which means that there will be a lot of troubles and problems linked to access to fresh water, and therefore famines, food insecurity, etc., etc. The EU is nevertheless concerned by this question. So there are investigations by the World Resources Institute showing that even a country like France might lack the access to fresh water it's enjoying today by something like 40 to 60% in 2040. So it's not at the end of this century. 2040 is just a day after tomorrow, which means we are going to have huge problems regarding the access to fresh water. So there is, of course, greenhouse gas emissions, so this is mitigation, but there is also the question of access to water. There is the issue of access to minerals, and we are poor in minerals in Europe, so that's the main problem of Europe. I definitely agree that Europe is a fantastic continent. We are wealthy, at least in comparison to a number of other countries, but we don't have access to minerals on our own territory, and that's also an issue that we have to keep in mind. And the fourth item, of course, is biomass. So farming, production of food for human beings and animals. And so we have to keep, I think, a systematic viewpoint where we consider the four aspects at the same time, because if we lose one of them, we might get into trouble. One counterexample for that is Tunisia. So Tunisia doesn't have a big solar power plant like Ouarzazate in Morocco. And Tunisia is facing a huge problem of access to fresh water, at least for its agriculture. So Tunisia now wants to pump out the water from the sea in order to desalinate the seawater. But for that purpose, in other words, to get this access to fresh water, you need a lot of energy. And of course, clean energy. And as I said, Tunisia doesn't have a big solar power plant. So now Tunisia has to build a big solar power plant, not to give electricity, to provide electricity to the poor farmers in the center of Tunisia, but just in order to desalinate water. And there you see the link between water, energy, minerals. You need minerals for a solar power plant and biomass. So that's a counterexample. And my main point is to say what we have to think about if we want to have a sustainable food system in Europe is, the linkages between the four items I just mentioned. The second point I want to stress, which just repeats essentially what Philippe already said, that the dead end were our farmers, most of them are locked in today. Just to give you a few figures, 65% of the farmers in the EU are working on small territory, on a small land, less than 5 hectares. 65%. So that's a majority. So you have a small minority of big agro-businessmen, and these people, they were not protesting last January, and you have a significant majority of small farmers. These small farmers are the guys struggling, because as Philippe said, they have to go into debt in order to buy machineries, and bankers are not philanthropists, as you know, and then they have to face the huge volatility of prices of seeds, fuels, machinery, and all this, and also the huge volatility of the prices for crops, what they are selling. And as Philippe said, they are trapped between the selling price and so the cap and the selling and the bottom of the prices. On top of that, they have to work much more on average than the rest of the Europeans. So they work on average more than 60 hours per week in the EU. They also, one third of them have more than 65 years, so they are more than 65 years old, which means the young generation doesn't want, or is less inclined, let's put it this way, to go into farming. Why? Because they see how difficult it is and how painful it is for the older generation. And between 20 and 40%, it depends upon the country, of these farmers are on the verge of falling into below the poverty line. So they are just surviving above the poverty line thanks to the subsidies of the Common Agricultural Policy, which means this Common Agricultural Policy is a complete nonsense to a certain extent, in the sense that it's promoting a chemical intensive, productivity-driven model of agriculture, which is completely, I believe, outdated, and which brings these portion of the small farmers into a situation where they can hardly survive. A large part of them are just on the verge of falling into below the poverty line. And at the same time, as Philippe said, we ask them to make a huge effort, that is to transition towards a completely new model, which is based essentially on, agroecology, agroforestry, no-till farming, organic farming, etc., etc. Maybe a last word, and then I stop here. At the same time, it should be obvious for everybody that we cannot change the laws of thermodynamics. So climate change cannot be changed just because we want it to change. And at the same time, we can change our rules. So the rules that we adopted, like legal rules or the European treaties, we can change them. We cannot change the second law of thermodynamics. And there is a trade-off between having to face the reality of climate change on the one hand and all the ecological turmoil that we are already facing, and on the other hand, the fact that we may decide to change a number of rules, including rules regarding public deficit, public debt, etc., etc. But maybe we're going to enter into more details now.
Thank you very much. You both said that Europe is essentially a rich continent, which is obviously true from like a global perspective, but again, when I open the, Politico or whatever, I see that Europeans are afraid, not Europeans, but the European discourse is very much loud of we are losing competitiveness, the European economy is not working well. The Draghi report is ringing the alarm bell, and the European Union itself wants to, increase competitiveness. Also, we need to spend on defense, both to protect Ukraine and to protect ourselves. And then there is austerity in multiple member states. And then there is the strategic dialogue, which is bringing up a lot of very interesting, very progressive ideas, and 2 more funds to make the transition more green and more just. And then I am looking at the process that is coming to discuss the next 7-year budget of the European Union. And I don't see this rich continent paying for all this. So how is this? Are we really rich, or what is? So there is a discrepancy here.
Well, that's a basic political question. So the question is not the means. The means exist. And by the way, Draghi says that as well. Huh? You have to read the Draghi report. It's not saying, we can't do this. It just says we have to choose our priorities because we can't do everything. And my way of translating that is that we cannot doing everything that we've been doing plus doing a whole set of new things. And to me, the cap is a good example. You can decide how you spend the cap money without discussing plus or less money on the cap. You may discuss, well, should we still spend it like we spend it today? And to me, the transition is about making choices of what you keep doing, what you change in the way you're doing, and what you stop doing, right? But it's not like we are devoid of means. I was in a discussion with finance people, so people who are basically managing funds, right, a couple of months ago. And all of them told me that there's no obstacle to Europe, borrowing money to fund its investments. Mm-hmm. What is lacking a bit is a clear sense of direction of what do we want to invest in. But if we have a clear plan as to where we want to bring this continent to, well, there's enough domestic, and I would even say outside money available to make it happen. But first, if I may say so, we need to get our act together, to know what we want to do. So first, to me, is a question of vision and political will to make that vision happen. But it's not that we are going to lack means to do it. And of course, we have to prioritize. Sure, absolutely. And again, the question is, in the farming world, who does need financial support and who does not need it? Let me just pick a different thing that is not directly related to farming. But when we had the pandemic, emergency measures were taken to support the economy, not just the European Next Gen EU recovery fund, but many national measures. For instance, the whatever it takes in France, the quoi qu'il en coûte. Well, a lot of money was spent on supporting people and organizations, that is companies. Can we say, with hindsight, that everyone who got financial support needed it? No, I don't think so. And so indeed, we are also called to better prioritize who needs money and who doesn't. As Gaël mentioned, not all farms need financial support. And by the way, those who didn't need it were not demonstrating a year ago. Absolutely not. They were very happy with status quo. So, again, put your money where your mouth is. So if we want a sustainable food system, let's put our money to make it happen. And indeed, not where it is unneeded. So it's a matter of prioritizing. And I know that usually politicians are seen as people not prone to prioritize, but that is something that we will need to do. And indeed, Draghi mentions that very clearly in his report, that we need to have a clear sense of priorities, and that means making choices. And so we cannot keep promising everything to everyone. This is just impossible. We need to make choices. But again, I do believe that we have the resources needed to have a prosperous Europe. And as Gail mentioned, yes, Europe has just 2% of the land. The European Union is 2% of the land of this planet, which means that in terms of natural resources, we are not the best endowed. Look at Greenland, just to take one place, or Canada, or the United States, or Russia. These are bigger places, right? So more resources. But again, Europe can exchange with others. It's not that we are called to be an island, you know. We can exchange with others. And there comes, and I'll finish with that, these terms of competitiveness, because, say, in the political family I'm part of, I know that a competitiveness report is something that was seen with a bit of suspicion, you know. Well, we need cooperation, not competition. But I'd like to look at it from a consumer point of view. When any of us decides to spend money, don't tell me that anyone here doesn't look at the value of what he or she buys and the price of what he or she buys. That is competitiveness. We are comparing. We're just trying to get value for money. And that's natural. And indeed, the call of Draghi is to make sure that Europe is still able to provide to others value for money, because we need the others too, right? So we need to trade, to exchange. And indeed, we need to be good at what we do, so that indeed we can exchange with others and to have the right degree of interdependence. So those who entertain the fiction that Europe can be an island and totally independent from the rest of the world, I think it's a dangerous fiction. Likewise, COVID showed us that being overly dependent is not a good thing either. And so we need to find the right place. Gail mentioned that we are very dependent in minerals. The minerals that we are using, by the way, to do fertilizers. Well, that leads you to think, well, actually, if we use less fertilizers, not only is this better for the planet, but actually it reduces our dependency from others. So we win on both sides. Likewise, in the energy transition, well, less fossil fuels, well, good for the planet and actually good for our dependency, because we are less than dependent from other countries which are not necessarily friendly to Europe. So we have to use this whole set of arguments also to build consensus around the need for the transformation, because it can be something that benefits our societies from more than one standpoint.
Maybe to help again, just having the broad picture, I would remind that the GDP of the EU, roughly speaking, it's 15 trillion euros, so 15,000 billions. Now, inside this GDP, you have the budget of the EU. It's 150 billions, so 1%. And inside these 150 billions, you have 50 billions, 1/3 of it, essentially, which is the PAC, the Common Agricultural Policy. So let's take a small comparison, which is maybe biased because I'm of Swiss origin, but nevertheless, Switzerland. Switzerland spends every year 3% of its federal budget for agriculture, subsidizing the ecosystemic services that are given by the farmers in order to promote biodiversity, keep water, fresh water sources, etc., inside the small, small mountains of Switzerland. So in fact, we are not spending that huge amount of money that people complain about. That's not true. There are other countries, of course, very rich, it's true, Switzerland, which are doing much better than we are. And just in matters of comparison, 17% of Swiss farming is organic farming. We are far from this in the EU. So it's possible to spend more money, to redirect it in a clever way in order to really promote an organic farming, as Switzerland, for instance, is doing. Second point, there is a report published 1 year ago now by the Institute Rousseau, the Rousseau Institute, which has been asked for by Philippe some years ago, which is called Road to Net Zero, and which is dedicated to framing a scenario of decarbonization of the EU until 2050. You know that we committed to have net zero carbon emissions by 2050, which does not mean no carbon emission at all, but which means that we commit that by 2050, the residual of emissions should be, could be, will be absorbed by resources like forest to absorb and to capture carbon. So there were something like 100 engineers throughout Europe who worked during 1.5 to 2 years on this report in order to conclude first that it's technically feasible, including agriculture, and I will describe in more details what we did about agriculture, and it does not cost that much. So all in all, the complete scenario would cost something like 2.3% of the EU GDP each year in terms of investment from today until 2050. 2.3%. So I'm not saying it's for free, it's not a free lunch for sure, but it's not as if it would cost, it's not a new war. A war would cost much more than this. Look at Ukraine. So that's the first very good news. Second, it's creating a lot of new jobs, shaping a new lifestyle which would be much more, human-friendly and even animal-friendly, everything-friendly actually, where you would have a new landscape with small cities, very dense, with urban transport, public transport inside the city, almost no car, bicycles and trams and metros and undergrounds and buses. And then trains, a huge, very dense network of trains between the cities, as we still have in some parts of Germany and Switzerland, but we no longer have it in France because we decided to put everything on the so-called high-speed train, the TGV français, a couple of decades ago, which was probably a mistake. And third, we would stop the craziness of having a highly specialized agriculture where you produce only milk, let's say in Normandy, and let's say meat in Le Limousin in France. But you would produce a little bit of everything everywhere in order to have very short transport distances. Food would be brought inside the city by the train, and people would go shopping in the small shopping centers around the train station. So this would be the end of the huge distribution with huge supermarkets which are 4 kilometers away from the center of the city and where you can only go with a car, etc., etc. So that's a complete change of lifestyle, and it's a much more interesting lifestyle than the one we have today, I believe. So this is a desirable future, and I definitely agree with Philippe. We can afford to pay for it, actually, if we just decide to do it, and it's a political decision. And actually, people should be enthusiastic about it if they were just to understand what we are talking about. And I'm not sure that the media, for instance, are helping a truly transparent and honest democratic debate on the ecological transition, the ecological verification, because nowadays, I don't know what you think about it, Philippe, but I have the feeling that, the fact that the far extreme right ideas and, imaginary has overwhelmed a huge part of the democratic debate, and so people think, well, ecology is just punishment. These are people who don't want us to be happy in life, but that's exactly the opposite, I believe. I mean, the kind of future that this kind of scenario would promise is much more desirable than the ugly future we are looking at nowadays in our situation.
Thank you very much. Before I ask my next question, which is my last question, I would ask everyone to think about, because afterwards we will give the floor to you in the room, and if I understand well from the distance, to our online audience too. So please think about questions and send it in the chat or prepare yourself, and we will go around with the mic. And while you are thinking, just what you ended with, you promised hope at the beginning, and you gave so much I almost lost my questions. Okay, this is so doable, it's easy, there is a plan, we just do it, fantastic. But again, when I open the journals, I almost see that this kind of the opposite is happening. I think the European citizens are hardly believing this. Also, your party lost a lot to the far right, which is, you can analyze this in many ways, but somehow the green message is kind of losing ground in Europe. And of course, as you said, many times these populist far-right ideas are not just bringing in other, I don't know, fears and so distracting this process, but also destroying the debate itself very often. So it's Europe is not as credible as it used to be. It's still quite credible. Even I'm Hungarian. Even in Hungary, still European Union is respected despite everything, and people want to be in the European Union so far. But there are very clear trends in Hungary and outside of it that what you are saying is seen as like an intellectual, I don't know what, and people don't believe that, I don't know, this is realistic. So, and of course, instead of a political analysis, I'm trying to focus this question on this day and this event. So we are trying to bring together these Christian organizations.
You can have a sort of virtuous circle where indeed activity attracts activity. And there's actually it's flourishing in the place where the number of initiatives that are there is incredible, but with little help from above, right? And again, if you have a big country, well, Belgium is like a big city, but if it's France, it's a big rural country. Hungary, it's smaller, but it's less densely populated than Belgium is. It's a decision by politicians to say, okay, are we going to invest in the countryside, indeed to show that it matters to us? And there, indeed, politicians cannot do everything, but they can provide the nudge that is needed to make it happen. Now, about your question about the Critical Raw Materials Act, again, I will quote Draghi because to me, in almost philosophical terms, he is putting the question right. We can't have our cake and eat it. We can't have everything. We have to decide what to do. And indeed, you cannot have 8, 9 or 10 billion people on the planet without ecological impact. And yes, if you want windmills, you need raw materials. And getting raw materials is indeed has an ecological impact. But the answer to your question to me resides in a very simple yet complex idea of sufficiency. We have to make choices. Well, we can have renewable energy, but we cannot have unlimited renewable energy, because that would mean unlimited natural destruction to get the infrastructure going. And that means, as we say in French, sobriété, in English more sufficiency, to decide to have what is needed to live a decent life, and that means not so much that the life become indecent maybe for others, because this is also a bit where I say the developed world has grown rich also by externalizing to other parts of the world the destruction that goes with prosperity, right? And this is why, for instance, I'm one who says it's only right that we should have mines in Europe. Because it's too easy to say we want the windmills in Europe, but the mines in Latin America, in Africa, or in Australia, or whatever. We should see for ourselves what it means to have laptops and tablets and cars and windmills and all the rest of it. So to reconcile, well, what we make, what we eat, with the actual impact of what we make, what we eat. Because that then leads you to think, okay, you know, I like the metaphor of the omelette and the eggs. We like the omelette, but we like that eggs are broken elsewhere, you know? If you are forced to break some of your own eggs, then maybe you start being less, how should I say, hungry about the omelette. And you say, okay, maybe I can do with 2 eggs rather than 4, right? And I can still have a good meal. So always keeping in mind that nothing comes free. Well, love comes free, but material stuff has an impact. And so if we want material stuff, we need material stuff because we are physical beings. And I'm glad that human beings are physical beings. But that means that, well, there's limits that physics and biology and chemistry impose on us, and we should rather respect them. So indeed, we can't have it all. That is my message. We can have some, but not all, not infinite. Now, being a Christian, not just in the Commission, in politics, well, you know, I've been politics was my hobby for 18 years, then it became my job, and it will be my job for the next 5 years. I never felt that I was another person in politics than I am in the private life. Now, you spoke of being perfectly consistent. No human being is perfectly consistent. I'm not, right? But I've always tried to put really as my compass the equal right to dignity of every human being, period. That is what has been and remains my compass in life, actually, not just in politics. And I have never had the impression that I was betraying that. So, of course, life is about compromises, because indeed, there's no such thing, and there's also this well, in the public discourse, sometimes you hear, well, you just have to do this, yaka, and everything will be fine. No, because if you do this, well, then you will have some negative impacts. I just spoke about ecological impact. If you do the green energy transition, yes, of course, it won't be oil, it's going to be raw materials, but that has an impact, right? It is not impact-free. But again, political decision-making is trying to find a balance. You want security, but you want freedom. But actually, if you want absolute security, you will have minimal freedom. So you have to arbitrate. You want resilience, but you want efficiency. Well, one is at the expense of the other. And what is the right point of equilibrium? Well, that is the point of the democratic debate. And at some point in time, well, we went very much in our economy in the direction of efficiency, but maximum efficiency is minimal resilience. COVID reminded us of that. So now the pendulum has swung a bit back towards resilience, but again, it's about where we put the balance. And again, it's art, it's not science. And I'm participating into that, and I find this, well, maybe it's a way for me not to be anxious, to do something about the challenges that we have to do. But no, I have not the impression, I was just discussing with someone before coming here, you will be working for von der Leyen, but you trust her. I don't. And I said, yes, I trust her. And actually, and I'll finish with that, it's so, well, I think I can say that everything that I've done so far in politics is based on trust. And trust to me is the basis of everything, in the sense that I see a bit the anxiety of our societies and the rise of say, national populist parties as basically a sign of loss of trust. You know, it's no mystery that people are losing trust in the democratic institutions, but also losing trust in one another, losing trust in our ability to build our future. You spoke, Gaël, about financing. It's again about trust. If there's trust that indeed money will be well managed, money will flow, no problem about that. But it's first about trust. And trust is not it's not observation, it is belief. It's about belief that indeed we are doing the right thing. Trust that someone else is also part of the solution, not just me. And to me, the basic answer to the sort of big depression that seems to live in many quarters of Europe is about rebuilding trust. And that's what I will be continuing the next 5 years. But I can tell you, if well, this new job of mine has been happening, it's because of trust. In this case, trust, not just between Ursula von der Leyen and I, But it's because of the trust that I've tried to build over the last 15 years in the European institutions. And indeed, well, you know, the reactions that I got, I told you earlier about my job, it's a sign of hope, but that was also coming, and I won't quote them, from leaders of other political families than mine. And that tells you something, that indeed it's still possible to build trust relationships across political divides. And this is more needed than ever since I've been in politics. Now is really the moment where we have to demonstrate that. And if we can do that, then I think that gradually we will rebuild the trust that has been shattered. Because truly, if people have lost trust in politics, it's because they have felt let down by politics. That, you know, everyone says, you know, when I was saying in my political family that equal human dignity is our compass, well, the basic reaction I got, yeah, everyone is saying that. First, this is not true. Not everyone is saying that. Second, many say it, but actually cater to some interest groups. And when you say the equal dignity of every human being, that means every human being, including, if you're a feminist, the male 50-year-old steel worker who is losing his job. He's a human being no less than anyone else. Right? And so, yeah, that's what we need to do. But so no, I do not feel as an alien or Daniel in the lion's den. No, I'm going into this with confidence that something can be done, and maybe more than some people expect. I may be disappointed. I said on the radio the other day, and then I'll be done, but. And I was improvising, but I said, okay, if at some point I realize that I can't do my job properly in my new role, and then I said, well, I will keep trying. Because people expect it, yeah, then I'll give up. But no, I will keep trying. Because, look, we can't afford to let our societies down. Voilà.
Thank you.
Just one additional question. I think, you went to Thésée, isn't it? So what role did Thésée play in your own trajectory, if I may ask?
Well, that's my anchor in faith. Why is it so? Well, there are several reasons about that, but first, I hate division, certainly amongst Christians, and is of where Christians of all denominations can meet and be together and pray together. Second, it's going back to the heart of the message of the gospel to me. Plain and simple. It's about trust, it's about hope, it's about love. No fuss about this. We go to the bare fundamentals in a very simple way. And so that's why over time, it's become my anchor, and I keep going there, and I will keep going there. So if you want to see me in the summer, you know where to go. By the way, it's interesting, and it's no secret since it was public, but my first one-to-one conversation with Ursula von der Leyen, we spoke about our lives, and Thésée came up very quickly. And her brothers and cousins were going there, but she never, at that time she had never been to Thésée, and she asked me to talk about this, but I said, well, you can't talk about this, you have to go there. And then we agreed to go together, and then COVID hit, so there was a 2-year delay, but in 2022 she went. And indeed she felt, I think she felt at home there. So it's not for nothing that there's trust between us, but voila. So hopefully she will go back.
Would you like to say some
final
maybe
words? Just a few words regarding the question of how do you incentivize people to go to the land, let's say, land side. Just one figure, which is the fact that there was a report published by European Commission a couple of years ago, about how many jobs would be created if we were to move really towards organic farming in Europe. And if I remember correctly, they spoke about 1 million people. 1 million people more at the European level, of course. So it does not mean 1 million people more for Hungary. And I guess the main challenge would be to convince the youngsters, the young generation, to go there. But it means if we really want to put into practice this decarbonization scenario, this could create a lot of jobs, including in remote villages. So this is one aspect of the. Of course, it doesn't solve the whole issue. And as Philippe said, you have the whole question of how do you also bring the health system, education system, post system, public service, etc. And there you need a real political project for that purpose. Going back to the question of minerals, raw materials. In addition to what Philippe said, I would say there is also a big challenge for Europe, which is moving towards a new model for industry, which is low-tech industry, which is exactly the opposite of this, because this uses a lot of minerals, and it's very hard to recycle. So we need exactly the opposite. So very simple manufactured products, easy to repair. You cannot repair this. I mean, you and me, we don't know how to repair that. It's very hard to recycle, very costly. So simple products with, very not intensive in terms of energy, water, and minerals, easy to repair and very easy to recycle. And that's a new mindset. There are a number of people working in this direction slowly, and this is definitely a huge challenge. After agriculture, organic farming, that's the next, I think, the next frontier for us in terms of a new type of civilization. What makes me very hopeful is another example which has apparently nothing to do with all this, but which really took place, namely Japan. Japan in the 17th century, the beginning of the Tokugawa era, people realized that it increased too rapidly. And at this time, in this society, wood was the main biomass for the whole society. And if you were cutting trees too rapidly, this would mean that after a few decades, you would lose any forest and you would not have any access to wood. And so people would die simply. And so the political authorities realized this, and then in a very authoritarian way, a la Japanese, they decided every couple has to cut this amount of trees per year, and if you were caught cutting more trees, then you would be tortured in a way that nobody would wish to experience in his life, etc., etc. But so I'm not saying the way this was put into practice was the right way to do it, but an entire country realized that they had to follow the rhythm of nature and to adjust our society, our aesthetic, our politics, everything to this rather than the contrary, and they did it successfully. And the very moment they stopped this was in 1868, the beginning of the Meiji era, when they discovered the Westerners and what the western side of the planet was doing. And then, unfortunately, they entered into a completely different imaginary. So, but this shows us that it's possible. We may have an entire country, and why not an entire continent like Europe, converting to this new type of imagination. Yeah.
Thank you very much for both of you.
Can I just suggest, sorry to interrupt, there are some questions online.
Oh,
you need a
because
microphone.
we said you have it in your chat. Do you have your mobile phone? Okay, so just so the online is going on. So we have a lot of people online. There are at least 4 questions, maybe a last round.
Yeah,
even if we are a bit out of time, but
okay.
we also start.
Would you like to pick?
No, you read it.
I do. Okay.
Okay, so you have 2 from Agnese Fiducia and 2 more from Tim Cooper. Do you want to read them?
Yeah, but for that I need.
You want me to read that?
Well, I need to read them, so sorry, I cannot do it faster than this.
Okay. So Agnese.
But maybe we don't need 4 more questions.
Yes, a comment, maybe to ask for a comment. So Agnese Fiducia writes, a big problem in food production is slavery. This Wednesday and last week during the general audience, Pope Francis spoke about children exploitation, children labor. So this is a comment. Then she continues, agriculture and food production haven't only problems of lack of water, energy and climate changes, but also labor exploitation, human slavery. So she goes back to this topic. And then there are two questions from Tim Cooper. It's written, how can the EU best promote progressive food policy that addresses ultra-processed foods and obesity? So that's one question. Finally, the other, is there a role for churches, such as serving appropriate food and drink, high animal welfare, organic, fairly trades, after church services at events and meetings? So this is the other question. I don't know if Tim Cooper is referring to the food that we have waiting for us downstairs.
Yeah.
So maybe I would suggest, even if we are a bit out of time, at least this last round, and then we conclude, if you think it's appropriate.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Well, certainly I can address a question about what the EU can do in terms of promoting, fighting against obesity and much transformed food. This is within EU competencies. Well, I mean, health not fully, but at least internal market rules about what can be and cannot be sold, and these kinds of standards are set at European level. I think there's a growing realization that indeed the more transformed food is, the more hazardous it becomes to health, and so this is a growing concern. So indeed I'm confident that we can move forward there. Now I would still hope that we are working more on the preventative side than on the curative side, that is that we are preventing harmful food to be sold rather than increasing the size of hospitals and treatments. So the EU can do it. It's a matter of consciousness, but I would even say of bandwidth, because at the moment, we have European institutions that produce law. Some would say we produce too much law, probably too complex law. But there's only so many days of the Parliament and the Council meeting. So indeed, it's a matter of priority. And at the moment, indeed, such issues do not feature very high on the agenda, yet they are still on the agenda. I have no doubt about that. It's a matter of priority. I would say when you look at the first acts that the European Commission is going to take, will be about the Green Industrial Act, will be about competitiveness and about simplification, and there's a point for doing that. But yeah, it's a 5 years term, and I know that these health issues are real. I mean, obesity and bad health is certainly a priority. But then again, there's stuff that can happen at national level as well. So we should always remind ourselves that we are working in a multi-layered democracy. There's the European Union, but there's member states, there's regions, there are local communities. They too can do something about it. And to make the connection with what was said about the food that churches can be serving, well, certainly governments, certainly as part of the education system, but also health system, are serving food, and they can start also changing stuff. And a lot is happening, for instance, in schools, in the sense of what kind of food is offered to kids. And so I know that a lot is happening there, certainly not enough. But then again, it's about choosing the kind of food system that we want. Do we want more localized, more simple, and that the transformation happens actually in the kitchen? Or do we want the transformation to happen big time in big factories and then served over thousands of kilometers? We have seen the limits of that model. You know where I stand on this. But again, there's all sorts of interests at play, and we will need to navigate these waters the coming few years, but this is certainly on our radar screen.
Yeah, I have little to add because Philippe said everything on this. Maybe just to confirm that church organizations could do a lot to be very prophetic and to show that it's possible to be happy, to eat less for those who are eating too much, less transformed products, etc., etc. Especially, I'm thinking of us Jesuits, especially for the school system that we have. We have a huge network of high schools and colleges in Europe, and we could definitely push and advocate so that the food that is distributed to the kids would be much better. There are talks about this, but it's not really put into practice as far as I know, and we could move forward in this direction, definitely.
So thank you with this for the questions, for your presence,
The final word, if you're here or online representing a Christian organization within the EU, please join the network, Our Daily Bread. And on behalf of the network, for our speakers, not your daily dose of bread, but more than a daily dose of chocolate, thank you so much.
Merci.